I think it might be healthier if, like, as a society, we develop, or as a species, we develop more acute language to treat mental health damage in the way that we treat physical damage. There's somebody that has been really helpful to me in the last year or so, who talks about the general state of mental health and how it's people will go to their therapist or psychiatrist, complaining about a broken arm, and that professional will say, "Well, that's crazy. Let's fix the arm," and then they come back in a week or a month, 2 months, with the same exact fracture from the same exact circumstances. And if it was an arm, people would say, how is your arm getting fractured? Like, how's this happening? Instead, like with mental health, we just say, oh, well, that's the way it is. Crazy. Let's put you back together, instead of like sort of like addressing the thing that's breaking the arms.
To be a creative or not? Is that the question? This is a topic we dive deep into in today's episode with artist and designer, not Dan Martin, aka Dan Martin. Dan and I have known each other for a long time and first connected as students when Learn Squared just began. And as a multidisciplinary creative working in film and games, art director Dan has worked on some of the biggest films and games around. So it's great to catch up with Dan and hear about the journey he's been on as a creative and a professional. And in this deep dive on our respective experiences, we also discuss our battles with depression, as well as forging our own creative paths, and how all of that intertwines and has shaped us to the people that we are today, as well as a whole other variety of topics. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Learn Squared podcast. I'm delighted to welcome our very special guest, Dan Martin. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Dude, so like, I'm sure people who've been with Learn Squared from the very beginning will be very familiar with yourself, especially the ones that like hung out in the community Slack days, the Discord days. But for those who are completely new, we got a lot of students who are just starting out, who are tuning in. If you wouldn't mind just letting everybody know who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Dan. I am the senior art director at a marketing agency based in Los Angeles. I work on films and video games like Call of Duty, Deadpool, Top Gun Maverick. Been there for about 10 years, and I love my team, and our clients are fun. So
Cool.
get to do silly stuff.
So how did you end up in that, I guess, role right now? Like, is that something that you've pursued or something that you fell into?
It's something I fell into. I knew very early on that I wanted to do art. But the only way that really made sense for me was graphic design, because that was accessible and a term that like I was exposed to, and could sell to my parents. And because otherwise it was going to be like, you got to learn programming or something.
Yeah.
And so I started with a graphic design major. Was pretty bored by it because my dream and exiting high school was to be a graphic designer at a record label. I was really into, my rebellious phase in high school was listening to metal music, because both my parents are like classically trained musicians. And so like I grew up like making music, playing music, learning all that stuff. But my rebellious phase was getting into heavy metal. And I found a local community. I mean, 2006, 2007 was like pretty big for the scene. Especially in like New Jersey, New York area. And my dream at that point was to do all of the art assets that a band would need, which at that point was like a website. MySpace was a big thing. For the millennials in the chat, and like t-shirts, that kind of thing. So I was in a band with my best friends. We were making music, and I was in these graphic design classes in high school, and so I started making like sort of mock merch for us, and then like printing it and just like showing up to practice with it to surprise them. And they were like, this is amazing. So like we ended up like making the merch. And I was like, this kind of works. And then our friends that were in other bands were like, who made the merch? And it turned into like this little business by the end of high school. Cool. So much so that like I had a portfolio entering college. By mid-October, I was really bored. So I reached out to this design collective. At that point, they were called the Sons of Nero. And they had done a couple of my favorite albums. And so I just like hit them up on MySpace and I was like, hey, I'm a freshman in college. I'm really bored. What can I be working on right now to be a no-brain hire once I'm done with this silly degree?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, how far are you from Princeton, New Jersey? And I was like, well, that's just 20 minutes up the road from my school. So they were like, sick, come in for an interview on Tuesday. And I was like, interview? I just wanted the answers. And so I showed up, and there's like this big sign once you like get into, it's basically a refinished barn was the office. And I was just expecting like design studio, right? Open up the door. There's this big like 1/4 inch like sheet metal like 3 foot by 3 foot sign of this. It just says Ferret Music, which was like a big like record label for like it was an imprint of Warner, if I recall correctly, and like a 38 revolver. And I was like, oh, some of my favorite bands are on this label. What's going on? I'm so confused because I had no idea that like they were overlapping.
Yeah.
The art director for Ferret was one of the guys in this Sons of Nero collective, and so I did a bunch of just contract work for them over the course of the next couple of years. I switched to an illustration degree. I changed schools, not in that order, and then discovered conceptart.org around 2008 and
right
was like, I want to do illustration, and got into Magic the Gathering, and that was sort of like what I thought my trajectory was going to be out of school. For a variety of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into a little later, I didn't end up like applying myself quite as directly as current me could have. And I ended up doing a mentorship with an artist that used to be sort of involved in the like tangentially involved in like the Magic the Gathering space. He might have done cards since then. His name is Mark Sheff. Shout out, Mark. Hope you're doing well. Haven't talked to him in a while. He like I did a mentorship with him, and for a month, basically, like he kicked my butt into getting a piece done. And about a year later, he was like, "I have this project. You're not that great at Illustrator, but you're a solid graphic designer." And it was like cutting out esports players from like photo shoot backgrounds, basically for use in like the World Series of League of Legends. And so he was like, you know how to use the pen tool, go. And so he's like, there's this big batch of images, it's due tomorrow, cut everything out. And so I thought it was just for him. It was for the company I'm with now. Technically, like he was sort of like the contract art director. And got it done. About a week and a half later, the owner of the company called me into the blue, and I was like, "Uh-oh, I think this is okay. Like, is everything all right?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah, have you ever played Call of Duty?" And I was like, "Well, I didn't fail a class in college because of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Yeah, I played it a little bit." And he was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to send over a bunch of stuff. And have you ever designed a book?" And I was like, "Well, I've done like CD layouts before. It's roughly the same principle." He said, "Okay, I'm going to get some stuff together. Hop on a call in an hour." And we knocked out the collector's edition like book that shipped with Advanced Warfare.
Cool.
And after that, it was just kind of like off to the races. I was like a consistent contractor for a couple of years, and I think the first like proper full-time hire. So
nice.
That was very in depth, but I hope
no. You explained everything clearly. So it's quite interesting because it's not like, I guess none of that you just said was kind of part of the plan, but it was kind of the direction you wanted to go in. Is that correct?
Yeah. I definitely would categorize it as something I fell into, not
Hmm.
something like I pursued. But I'm quite content where I am because
Nice.
projects come and go, but the people you work with are pretty constant. And
Right.
if you have a good community, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I like a good community. So
Awesome. You mentioned about like switching degrees in you were at college at the time, right? Like how easy is that? Because I remember being at uni almost halfway through. In hindsight, I was like, I should have switched, but I didn't. But
mm.
it wasn't like, from what I understood, easy to do. What was that like for you?
Mm.
Like, was that like something that was met with resistance, or were you quite adamant that I need to make a switch at that point in time?
So I think to give listeners uh, properly contextualized data on this, I need to give a little bit more information about like the timeline and like
Right.
the circumstance of the school itself. So I was at a sort of like mid-level state school in New Jersey my freshman year, and that's when I started doing the contract work with the record company. And at that point, I was just like, this is exactly what I want to do. Why am I going into debt for another 3 years to just do what I'm
Right.
already
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
like I'm getting the experience and I'm like, doesn't make sense to me. Um, the so because of that, I was like, I need to get out of here. I also like sort of checked out of school like that second semester, like the spring semester, and I started like partying a bit and not applying myself. And I was like,
Right.
well, both my parents are like teachers by trade, and education is very important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not really an option that I drop out and just like pursue the career. And so I was like, okay, well, let me transfer. And I transferred to a podunk Wesleyan school in the middle of Indiana uh, that has, uh, just American Christianity in its blood. It's one of those places.
Okay.
So as a result, the art department is like not really carefully overseen by the general administration, and so they made it very easy for me to number one transfer in with my credits, and number two switch majors. Basically, I just had to convince one of the illustration professors that like I was going to work hard as an illustrator, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, I'm not having fun as like a graphic designer.
Yeah.
Like it's fine, but like
Yeah.
I'm I'm not like storytelling in the way that I want to, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I fell in love
Mm.
with art to begin with. It was the storytelling of it all, versus solving rectangles. And so I it was easy, honestly.
Fair
Like
enough.
I was just like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is the illustration I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot for me to learn. And they were like, okay, cool, here you go.
Sick.
But like from a business perspective, for the illustration program, they're like, the more bodies we get in there, the more money like
Yeah.
we could
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
from the budgets. Like it's still a business, so
Sure.
it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you still partying at that time, or did the switch to illustration, the illustration course, kind of change that?
So the actual deciding factor, like the reason I chose this like borderline fascist Christian school in the Midwest is because they have a no drinking policy, and you sign a like an agreement, like a legal agreement that like you understand you will be expelled if you are caught drinking.
Okay.
And I was like, that'll keep me off it for at least 2 semesters because it's going to be a
Right,
lot harder
right,
to
right.
find the parties.
Right enough.
And it worked. So I made some very close friends there in the art department, and we worked hard, but it could have been harder and better informed. But the internet wasn't what it was, and
Mhm.
finding tutorials and that kind of thing wasn't quite what it was. But
Yeah.
yeah, it kept
Interesting.
me off the drinking for a little bit.
So it was kind of like education slash, I guess, pre-rehab or a kind of thing. But
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah, prehab.
yeah, like it. What made you, like, I guess, focus more on the party side as opposed to education? Like, was it just where you were at in your life? Was it just something that was more, that's what drew you more than, I guess, this creative avenue, or like was
Yeah,
it simply where you were at, I guess, in terms of academically just was not, I guess, stimulating you in that way, hence why you were drawn to that? Like, I guess it's all dependent on the
exactly.
individual, right?
Like
Like
I,
some
mhm,
people can switch it on and off, some people are like attracted to this thing and they can't help it. What was it
mhm,
like for you?
mhm. Well, because I knew sort of exactly what it felt like. I knew how it felt when I was doing something I was really passionate about. And so like as soon as like a project checked that part of my ADHD brain, I was like hyper focused on it and could not be stopped.
Mm-hmm,
But if
mm-hmm.
something was more like a lot of the courses, especially your first 2 years of like a liberal arts with an arts major education, those first 2 years are very exploratory and just sort of like introducing people that didn't maybe have like the best funded art departments or like go to external schools or classes outside of their high schools. Like if they didn't get exposed to these types of ways of working or like
Yeah.
ways of thinking or types of media, then like a lot of those classes are sort of like designed to expose students to that. And so when I was like, well, this is ground I've already tread. Why am I?
Yeah.
Wanna,
Yeah.
can I do anything? And like, I didn't have a healthy relationship with authority at that point. So like, I didn't have like the even the understanding that like I could sell like my own projects almost to the professors and just
Mm,
say like, okay, this is like I understand what this is doing and this is why I understand what we're doing here. Can I take these principles and these concepts and maybe this media and like apply it in this way that I'm going to be really passionate about and will actually help me develop a better
mm,
portfolio?
mm.
I didn't have that relationship and understanding with authority, so I never like got there. So
Yeah, fair enough.
I checked out and
And
started abusing alcohol,
oh god.
as one does.
And do you say that like in a like a comedic way, or was it serious like abuse? Like, did you have a problem?
I say that in a comedic way.
Okay,
At that point, I'm. We can get into this like later once we get later in the timeline, but like have had a
sure.
season of very unhealthy alcoholic abuse. But
Right.
you gotta know or sit in the dark to know the dark,
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
No,
So
definitely, definitely. Okay, now fair enough. So what was, I guess, like switch to illustration, but you were kind of like just to make sure I got everything like all correct. Like you were working at the time, right? So you were still like I guess doing professional work. When you switched
on
to
and off.
professional, oh,
So
yeah,
for the professional work, right around my junior year, that kind of fell off because Warner ended up getting more involved at the record company, and the guys that owned the record company ended up selling to
okay,
Warner, like selling the share in Warner to Warner, and then starting up a new record company. And as a result, sort of like things kind of fell apart with that like design collective, and then they started like a new one with like some of the team, but like also other
yeah,
collaborators. So basically like things changed and client bases changed and I was like going more the illustration way anyway and they
hmm
still needed like graphic design and video work and I wasn't doing video work at that point so I was scared of it
right,
and
right.
so it just sort of like fell off and I started focusing more on the illustration and like only taking like a couple of like friends projects on here and there so
Got it.
that
And
that,
just
that
like
was like the last 2 years of college so sorry
so,
I keep talking over you.
no, 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 it's all good, it's all good. So like what? I guess in that short period where you were working for clients, like you said, um, what were you learning specifically in that kind of like I guess environment versus
Mm-hmm.
where you were at like academically? Like were you learning things that you knew immediately? Like it was quite clear that okay, I could not learn this in any other situation other than like as an employee.
um I don't know how to answer that without holding probably the school to an unrealistic standard.
Hmm, hmm.
Because I'm just like, well, this is kind of basic, and like, if we're gonna set up an album cover for like a foil pass to make part of it reflective, like, uh, it's pretty like it's 10 minutes to sort of like talk through the logic and like the process of just like setting up UV so the printers know where the UV channel is going to be. And they so to me that's very simple and very applicable where it's just like this is the thing I want to deliver. This is how I solve it. And again, like had I like had a healthy relationship with authority, like I would have been able to just be like, okay, like this is the project, this is what I want to do, this is how I itemize things, like what am I missing, and like how do I solve these things? And I'm sure like one of the professors could have like done that for me, but it just wasn't part of the
Mm-hmm.
curriculum. And so
No.
um I think like not to like be a total learn squared glazer, but like I part of what I love so much about you guys is that like it is sort of a la carte, and you're just like, okay, that's the kind of thing I want to solve, be able to solve, like that's the work I want to do. So I do that, you know.
Yeah.
It's
And
problem solving. It's just visual problem
no,
solving and storytelling.
exactly. I guess when you discovered Learn Squared, or I guess just online learning in general, because it sounds like you had a similar relationship to me in that regard. Like it was a case of I was in this educational, you could say system, I paid to be there. But it was like I was trying to make myself fit into their structure as opposed to me finding my own way, not realizing that I could. And then I found out online learning, obviously Learn Squared, the big game changer for myself. And it was a case of like, oh, there's a way to do this. And it fit perfectly into me. It sounds like that was the same thing for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Sick. And I guess like wrapping up
Nothing to add. Perfect.
no, exactly. Yeah. In the illustration course, so how did that like pan out for the rest of that journey? Like, did you finish the course?
The degree.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I graduated with an illustration degree. The skills that I learned there, though, set me up to be very employable in the 1990s. I graduated in 2011, so
Okay.
not so much. Like there were I think maybe two digital art courses for the
Yeah.
illustration
Yeah.
track, and those digital art courses were mostly like graphic design techniques and like photo retouching, and uh, not about like not about anything like and this was like right on the cusp too of photo bashing and like
Mm-hmm.
mache changing the whole landscape. So it was sort of a weird time
Yeah.
because like I graduated with skills that were irrelevant, and the funny thing is like everybody else sort of graduated at the same time with skills, even if like it was a good program, like within a year like their skills were irrelevant because
Mm-hmm.
you gotta do photo bashing,
Mm-hmm.
or like photo integration, and like have
Mm.
some at least part of a matte painting workflow uh, as like a deployable skill set for projects. So
Similar
yeah,
journey.
I finished.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
kind of goofy though because I was just like, oh man, this was not a great use of my money.
I mean, hindsight, but at that point in time, though, did you feel that whilst you were there, or was it more like a hindsight thing where you thought, but that was a waste of my money?
I think that I was just happy to be a part of like a normal track for life. So uh part of the reason I like just enjoyed the college experience was because I grew up kind of in the woods, like in the Appalachians.
Okay.
Like my parents' house is like 2 miles off the Appalachian Trail. Like there's bears that come through every once in a while.
Sick.
There's rattlesnakes up there. Like it was a fun place to grow up as a middle schooler because
Mm-hmm.
like me and my brothers were building like dirt like BMX ramps and like almost breaking backs like on a
Wow.
regular basis and playing paintball, and it was very fun. But I felt very isolated there.
Yeah.
And it didn't help that like my parents decided to like homeschool us, and I got like the longest time there. So like anytime I got like to interact with like civilization, I was just like, this is where I want to be.
Wow.
And so for me, like I don't think I saw like college as a waste of time because it helped me to like get socialized a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as we've talked about a little bit offline, like there's a significant amount of like delayed adolescence in
Yeah.
the way
Yeah.
our brains are put together. So like I was like there's delayed adolescence in terms of like the upbringing environment, and then there's delayed adolescence in terms of like the wetware, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like this. It is what it is. You do what you can with it,
Yeah.
right?
Of course. Of course. Now that's interesting because I was just gonna like follow up with the question, thinking, I get you from the perspective of where skills were at, or I guess like the skills that you needed to learn, because it was similar for me. I graduated in officially 2010, but it was like kind of like 2008, 2009 when things started to like, okay, this is what we've taught you. And it was also, like you mentioned, cusp is a perfect word. Like Photoshop was kind of like, okay, I got to start using it more seriously as opposed to, traditional medium, and also getting introduced to 3D. Not realizing even then, like how embedded it's going to be in almost everything. Um, Back then, it was a case of like studying transport design. It was just for like, bringing your models to life, just so clients can see it versus what was typically clay models back then. So it was like, yeah, okay, cool. I got introduced to certain things, but I wasn't taught the stuff that really was going to, like, if I knew that almost immediately, I would have been like, I guess the golden boy that everyone wanted to kind of hire, kind of thing, because you knew this new emerging thing. However, being in that experience, going to university, a bit like yourself, it was a case of like, okay, yes, I definitely learned a bunch of stuff that take away the skill side of things or the technical side of things. Like I had to be there to learn it. And if I didn't go there, then I'm not sure the kind of person that I would be. Failings included as well, as opposed to just the good stuff that I listened to. Like it definitely set me on the trajectory that I'm on now, whether I like it or not. And looking back, for a while I wasn't at peace with it. Definitely was a chip on my shoulder and a big regret. But I think I'm at peace with it now. Are you at peace with it? Or do you have a different perspective?
Yes,
from that time as well.
But that's because like it's in the past. You can't change it. Like
Mm.
we're right here, right now. That's
Yeah.
the eternal like present is like the only thing that matters. And like it the what happened in the past, how I conducted myself, the options and techniques I was presented at that point are it is what it is, and like all that matters is what I do right now. Because like if I hang out back there too much, like that takes me out of here, and then like I don't enjoy life because I'm ruminating on the past.
I'm happy to hear that, because that's something that I'm much better with, but I didn't realize how much I dwell on the past and kind of still do. Like, not even a case of like regrets, more like wishing I'd done something different. Like it almost occurs to me that, oh, I did that thing back then, and my brain like, how do you go fix it? Even though it's happened so long ago, that game's finished. It's not even developed anymore, but you're still trying to finish it. But that's something that I have to like kind of coach myself out of. For you, is that something is that how you've always been, or did you have to kind of like come to that realization yourself?
That was a very hard fought realization for me. I, for a variety of reasons that we can get into the very specifics if you'd like. But for me, the habit of replaying all of the perceived mistakes that I have in my past is it's been ever present in like my relationship with myself. And the past year or two, I've really gotten better at recognizing those patterns and doing what I can to sort of like counterbalance or stabilize the spin that it puts on my perception of myself. So like I can talk about it in this way. Practice is slightly different. I'm getting better, but like it's still like it's a practice, right? So
yeah, it's a bit like
it's your relationship with yourself.
It's like being an artist or a creative. Like you can know the theory, but you still got to practice it. And if you don't practice it, it goes cold, or you lose your muscle memory. You have to warm up before you jump on the pitch. Otherwise, you're just gonna pull a muscle or get injured or ruin your career, kind of thing. But no, it's good to hear that. It's like it's a nice thing to hear that you say that, because equally, like, I guess what I'm getting at is I know people as well who are kind of in that right now, and I guess I could have been in that myself, where I wasn't aware that I had to have that conversation with myself. I wasn't aware that I needed to be aware, and like you said, take the steps, like almost find your own little workflow to manage your own self. as opposed to taking it for granted, thinking this is how I've got to be, this is how I am. Everything else is an issue. I guess we can do the whole thing about looking in the past again. If you hadn't made that realization, do you think things would play out more differently now? Where you are now in your life?
Which realization specifically?
Just
like
there's
a couple that I
sure.
could
like just more like how you are now, like how you said, like you have to, how more you understand yourself now, like the understanding of yourself, and I guess what makes you tick. Whereas before, I guess that kind of, you had to work on that, you said. So if you were still working on it, or even didn't realize you had to work on it, I guess is a better question. Where do you think you'd be right now, I guess, as a person?
That's a big question. And it's sort of it's a question of like, where do you draw the line for like that understanding, right? Because so much of like coming into a place where I like am able to like accept myself and my story, and like the choices based on the options I had available. So much of that is feels to me, because I'm close to it still, feels like sort of like the last chapter in like that volume of my life. But there's a lot of chapters before that where like there were little realizations that led up to the big realization, and like little patterns recognized that led up to that. So it's hard to say that it like to say that like that one thing would have changed anything for where I'm at now, because like that one thing is the result of everything that came before it.
Yes.
Which I feel like I'm getting like a little too galaxy brain and making connections that aren't like necessarily like obviously there, but it's hard to answer that in a way that is just like, well, yeah, like fundamentally, like to be able to get to that point, like you have to like have all of these other like realizations that would have led you to a different spot. So like to specifically answer your question, like for me to like not have that realization, who I would be would have meant that like a whole host of other things about like formative moments would have gone differently for me, and the way I internalized them would have gone differently. One of the more formative moments for me was I want to say it was like let me do the math here. 11, 12, 13, 14. I think it was like September 16th, 2001, sitting in church, which this was a crazy church. A crazy Reformed Baptist church, where the sermon title was titled "A Time for War," and it was in direct response to the 9/11 attacks. And the entire sermon was selling the congregation on invading the entire Middle East, and it didn't make sense to me at all as a 12, 13-year-old, because I was like, this is antithetical to this Jesus Christ you claim to worship and follow. And so like at that point, like that was a major breaking point that led me to a point where I was like, okay, like I can sort of come to peace with myself and like the context of that, like I came up in, and like provided me these options to become this person, to all that stuff. But using that as like an example, like if I hadn't had that moment, like I would be probably in jail for like storming the Capitol on January 6th. Like that's kind of how wild like that upbringing situation was,
Right.
So that's a messy way to like answer that question, but I hope it like
no
makes sense.
no, it does. And I guess like the follow was going to be like, yeah, we spoke about things about regrets and obviously making changes and realizations, but one of them is also like kind of accepting that everything that you are now is, as you summed up, was just a collection of all those things that happened before. And yes, you can change going forward, but I was kind of going to get at like, do you reject who you were before? I guess that's quite a dramatic way, but obviously you sense that it's a no. And I'm glad to hear that, because I think that's also quite important as well.
Like for a long time, I'd like rejected that version of myself, and a big part of, well, one of the early steps of healing was just sort of like uh sitting with that version of myself and sort of embracing that Dan. I this is a little maybe a little flirting with like Buddhism a little bit, but like you are all versions of yourself at all times. And that's the funny thing with like being triggered or trauma. Like it can sort of like if you get triggered and there's like a traumatic event to like a past version of yourself, you can get snapped back to that version of yourself, even though you're right here right now. And so like it's part of my healing process was learning to accept and forgive and learn how to love that version of myself in the way that version of myself needed. But we sort of repress it, and because it's not like physically right here right now, it's easy to not conceptualize that. So. I don't actually do drugs. It sounds like I do a ton of drugs. But like
Fair enough.
There's this study I should have sent you because I feel like you would have gotten it. You would have found it interesting. But there's a study that I saw a month or two ago about how folks that have some level of like ADHD or maybe flirting with like non-neurotypical like mind
right. Yeah.
makeups have like elevated levels of DMT, and which is why I'm just like, yeah, I could raw dog this like existence. Like I don't need drugs. Like, stuff's pretty cool.
Do you like? Have you messed with DMT? I've never spoken about. I don't do drugs at all or anything like that. But obviously, I hear it a lot in a lot of podcasts and a lot of people mentioning it.
Yeah.
But what's your I was just gonna say, like, have you ever try anything like that? And do you want to try anything like that? Internet gets a bit weird here sometimes, but I think it's still it's still recording. It should be fine. Okay. But yeah, where were we
at? So to answer your question,
oh yes,
no, I haven't experimented much with drugs. I am a little scared too, and a lot of that is the DARE propaganda that happened in the U.S. For a variety of reasons. And both my parents were like very, very sober because of the religion thing growing up. And so it was quite rebellious of me to experiment with alcohol. Eventually played a little bit with marijuana once that was legalized. And at some point I do want to have like a talk to God shrooms experience. Because I feel like that could heal parts of me. God, just sort of a general thing, because
sure,
you know, but like, yeah, maybe at some point, but like not right now, because I'm just content as heck. So like, I don't feel like I need to work through anything like at the moment, and that's just like this chapter. I'm sure the next chapter I'll be like, I gotta work through all this other stuff I forgot about. So
now, fair enough. Me neither. I've never tried anything like that. I don't think I ever will. It just doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. But I know of people who either will have or will rely on it, kind of thing. So I've always kind of been curious, because I've no like judgment in any particular way to people that do or don't. But I just know like I won't, kind of thing. Yeah.
The super cool thing is like my friends that do, like they have like very different perspectives on things, and like sometimes I'm like, oh, that's really cool, like that realization you had, like I don't know if I could have ever gotten there without that. But then there are other times where I'm just like, yeah, well obviously, like,
yeah,
it took you that to like figure that out. So I don't know. It's like everybody has like a little like perspective and like a place in like the community of humanity, and what's cool is like we all get to experience the experience of existence and share it with each other. So, I don't know, it's cool.
And I guess it like yeah,
can like
I agree,
like,
but
just, I don't know, experiment if like you like it. Like,
yeah, just do it legal, be safe, and know what you're doing before you just jump into it. Don't do it blindly. I guess like, I think for some people, I've spoken to some people just generally like they feel like they have to get into a certain mind state to create the stuff that I think they want to create, or get like, I guess what I call a flow state is there's a certain zone where you're in where you're thinking like you snap out and thinking, whoa, I could not have done that without that particular kind of state that I'm in. And I think some people can get there through other means. And I was just kind of like curious because it seems some people rely on, I guess, external things to get them into a certain zone. Whereas myself, I can tend to get myself there if I need to, but I also know certain things need to be in place for me to get there. So it's not like I have complete control, like of the switches, so to speak. But I'd love to know your experience with that. Like, do you have a creative zone, a creative like kind of, I guess, vibe that you can switch into, almost like, Power Rangers would go into their Zords and do stuff. Like, do you
Yeah,
have anything like that?
I do. It is not. I think part of the reason, like, I have no curiosity when it comes to substances, is because I can't work in any level of non-sobriety. Like, it's really difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I overthink everything, and it's not good. In terms of getting in the zone, I'll build like playlists for projects,
Sick.
or because music is just it's something like that impacts you at like a very deep emotional, or like, for lack of a better term, like soul level. And because it's only audio, it allows your brain to just fill in all of the details in terms of like narrative and
Mm-hmm.
visuals. And so that's one of my go-tos. Recently I've actually been just going to like the library or to like a bar, and uh going there, putting on the noise canceling headphones, and like not listening to anything, and just experiencing like life happening around me as I'm like
Mm-hmm.
working. And that's been like really helping me to focus and like lock in on stuff. So
Yeah.
it's been working lately. But
No,
playlists are sort of my bedrock. So.
same. Like music, speaking of drugs, by the way, I'm going to contradict myself. I definitely think you can medicate yourself and prescribe yourself creatively, like get into certain states with certain types of music. I guess it depends on your own connection with music and knowing what music does to you, and specifically what about the music, if it's a genre, if it's like a particular artist's use of instruments or the way they arrange things. Like, I
Yep.
could just nerd out on that all day long. But I also know when I need it, when I don't need it, if I want it, if I don't want it. But yeah, music is. I'm glad that that's something that you do and you do deliberately. Um, Also, today, even early enough, like a few hours ago, we went to a beauty spot, just nature, just like a nice stream or a river, whatever it is. And I was just sketching there, and I'd never get a chance to really sketch in nature because I'm always with the family, there's always like little kids and all that kind of stuff. And this time I did, and I've never sketched in nature with that sensory, I guess, acoustic around me, with like, a river. It was quite windy as well, and that definitely put me in a different state. So already I'm planning the next one where I'm going to sketch with that as well. So, and I think like with the senses as well, just to kind of like go on a bit of a, a bit of a, I guess, a rant or whatever. One reason why I think working to sound or music works is because it shuts off one of your senses almost, or it occupies one of those. So I guess like you focus now on the other senses, and then when it comes to creating, it's normally just touch and sight, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons. Like, if you got a simple brain like mine now, I guess by extension, I'm saying you got a simple brain too. Killing off one of the senses does kind of help with that as well. But with music specifically, do you have any go tos? Like, what's your, I guess, recipe
Uh-huh.
of the kind of music that you use to get you into zones?
So I when we first met, I did. And it was like really industrial, sort of like EDM, black metal. I had like a very specific playlist, but it was like for a project, and like all of my work that wasn't like for um, the the marketing side of things, all of that was like for that one project. So like it's still sort of project based.
Mm-hmm.
No, it really depends on the project. My hobby these days is to be a bit of like a production designer director.
Mm.
My best friend and I uh, are very slowly putting together like a couple of pitches, and like for one of them, it's a bunch of musical numbers. For another one, it's like sort of spacious, like soundscapey with like a little bit of like industrial influence. Um, Another one is just uh, orchestral bangers. So it's kind of all over the place.
Cool.
Um, I have some artists that like I've had on repeat. That like when I don't know what I want to listen to, like I'll put them on. There's
Yeah.
this girl Chapel Roan that put out an album last year, and she is the most talented young woman in pop music these days.
Hmm.
Her voice is incredible. She can do everything from like pop bangers like Kesha or Katy Perry or Lady Gaga.
Hmm.
Like she really is giving like people that were paying attention to Gaga when Gaga was coming up. She's giving people the
Hmm.
same vibe because she's been doing
Mm.
like the work the last year and just showing up at like little open mic nights with her guitarist and like just practicing her songs, getting used to being in front of an audience.
Sick.
And then she's got a voice like an Adele. Like she's everything. She's so good. She's been like backflipping on the charts right now. Like
Yeah.
I have a group chat with a couple of friends where we're all just like, she's incredible, and like we've been like watching her like climb the charts the past week. I'm so excited about her. But
Oh wow. And
it's poppy. It's super fun. She has this like '80s style banger that is. If you've seen Lisa Frankenstein, I think it's on Hulu these days. That was a really fun little high school like ride, and
Mhm.
it's very much in that like sort of Edward Scissorhands vibe, but with like more
Okay.
neon. But yeah.
And have you always had that relationship with music? Like, has it always been there? Like, just soundtracks and sounds and knowing that like music connects with you, or did you come to that realization over time?
No, I've always known that. I part of the reason I like went towards graphic design instead of like music performance was because I knew how difficult and like nearly impossible making a career in music performances. And so
Huh.
I was like, graphic design is a lot more attainable and realistic.
Yeah.
And I love it so much that I would much rather keep like music composition and performance like a hobby. I don't want
Hmm.
it to be corrupted by like the pressure of delivering on a deadline. So
Same. Yes, I had the exact same journey. It was a case of like, so how long have you made music? You said you was in a band. Like, how long have you made music? And I guess like anyone can make it. Obviously, it's like art, anyone can pick up. But you know, there's a moment where you're like so into it. You know, okay, this is a serious thing. It's not just like something like, oh, I'm gonna try cooking and baking. It was fine, but I'm done with it. Like, or gardening or something. Like, there's a moment where okay, you're sucked in. You can't get out. You pass the point of singularity, whatever it's called, and that's it.
yeah.
You're in. Um, is that the same case for you?
Yeah. Well, it's tough for me because like it was such an important part of like my like prefrontal cortex development. Like because as my mom was like pregnant with me, like she was teaching choir at local middle
Okay,
school. Like she was running piano lessons out of
interesting.
her home. Like she and my father were playing like Brahms on the stereo, like or Beethoven or whatever. Like they it was so founded. Like I just don't know a, a version of existence without like a without some version of music like playing in my head like as I'm
Mm-hmm.
hallucinating this reality. So like
Sick.
it's just it's always there. And like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think in terms of like composing my own music, part of what really was addictive about that was the community aspect of it, where I was like with the band and like doing something like with people and not like isolated, homeschooled. So
Mm, sick. Um, with that said, though, like, what made you decide to keep it a hobby? Was it a conscious choice, or did you kind of know, like, to kind of protect it? Because I had something similar as well, where it was like the creative path, and by creative I mean like because they're both creative, like the visual arts, and then music. And I remember at one point I was like, when the visual art stuff was like super tough, I was like, oh, I want to be, like a producer or whatever, right? As a classic bedroom producer, I still am. And I thought, yeah, because there was no pressure involved in that, no deadlines involved. I was like, this is what's more enjoyable. But then I remember, like, when I was a bit more into that, I was like, nah, making pictures is more fun because, again, that wasn't the work kind of thing. But then I realized that, okay, this is the path I'm taking as a professional, and this is just there for, I guess, my own therapy.
Mhm.
What was that similar for yourself?
I think so. I found solving problems and like overcoming obstacles easier with art because it was kind of outside myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was drawing comic book characters. I was solving like a uh like trying to visually represent like what a band was trying to put together for an album or uh, a joke or a reference they wanted on a t-shirt. Like that kind of thing was it's outside me. And when it came to music, I think that it's such an honest, and I'm talking about like music with vocals. Like when it comes to
Yeah,
instrumental
yeah.
music, that's sort of a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I was trying to write music with vocals and something to like narratively or emotionally connect to, and that's it. It's so it has to be so honest. Um,
Mm.
and you have to know yourself really well to be able to do that, and I didn't at that point, and I didn't even know that was what was missing. And so I just knew it was more difficult, and I wasn't able to communicate the emotion or the story that I wanted to because I didn't have the vocabulary for it. And so it it was something I knew that like I don't have it. The juice is not there for me. And
Mm.
so uh that was just a part of the calculus in that decision. So
And I like how you explained and are aware of your connection to music and I guess like where it's come from. You definitely like you can tell that's something that you've thought about and you kind of like come to the realization of its importance to yourself. What about design and being an artist? Was that kind of always there as well? Or is that something that you've nurtured?
um no, I think it was always there. Uh
Mm-hmm.
because uh, uh, because of the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, and so in the comic strip it's beautifully illustrated by Bill Watterson, but occasionally there's sort of like Calvin's like 5-year-old drawings of whatever chaos is going on in his head, and I was like, oh, like that I can do that right now, but maybe someday I'll be able to do that other thing.
Okay, okay.
And so because of that, I was just like, okay, that seems like maybe I can figure that out. Um, so I was exposed to that sort of thing early via Calvin and Hobbes.
Hmm. And the switch, and I say switch, I guess it's more like it's not really a switch, it just kind of happens. Yeah, like you said earlier on, like it was, you had to, like, I guess that was the job that seemed like a respectable job to go for, or I guess
Mhm.
vocation. But
Uh,
when was there like a moment or a conversation with yourself where you were like, okay, I gotta take this seriously or I gotta do this as a profession? Like, was there a moment
yeah,
or did it just like,
yeah.
yeah, what was that?
That was very early on for me. That was probably freshman or sophomore year of high school, where I was just like,
Right.
okay, uh, if I want to not be in this environment where I feel very isolated and alone,
Uh
and I want
huh.
to put myself in a place where I feel less isolated and alone, I need to be able to afford food, shelter, uh, etc., transportation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I gotta lock it in. But I didn't actually lock it in for like a couple more years. But yeah, it was pretty early.
Mm. Now, I guess like jumping to the present, what is a day in the life for you as a creative like nowadays?
Um, it's kind of weird for me right now because I'm recalibrating. Because
Yeah.
we had two projects sort of stack up. Marketing is kind of goofy in that things can change, and there's a lot going on sort of behind the scenes that I don't see because I'm just an art director. I'm not like interfacing directly with the clients. And the clients have like a whole storm that they're managing on their end, and so
Mm.
everything is sort of in flux until it's not, and then when it's not, it's go time. And so occasionally, like a project will just sort of like get pushed a little bit because of whatever else is going on for that client in the
Mhm.
background, because everybody has their own projects. We're very fortunate in that like we're able to work with a variety of studios at the same time. The my day ideally, I can talk about ideally because like right now is just sort of like, okay, like what am I doing again?
Yeah.
So I live like in Eastern Standard Time. I live in Ohio these days, and all the work is in LA. All the clients are in LA, and so like my day is pushed kind of late, and so like I definitely need to be online between like 12 and like 7 8 o'clock my time, um, depending on like how hot things are and how many people like if I'm working on say Deadpool 1 and Ryan Reynolds needs to sign off on everything, then I'm going to be up later because whenever they can get stuff in front of him, and if
Yeah.
that's late in the day, then like I have to work late in the day to handle all the edits for all the myriad of people between me and him that need to sign off on it before it goes to him. So
Okay.
um an ideal day. I'm sorry, I keep giving you like rabbit trails. But
No, no, this is good.
ideal
This is
day
how
is
my brain
like
works. That's fine.
is like wake up, do like a light workout. I love walk. I hate driving. And I'm in the wrong country for that. Because everywhere except for New York is like very car dependent. I hate driving uh, because it separates you from your community. I like being able to walk around and like wave to neighbors and like
Oh.
get to know the people that I live nearby. And um, so I'm very fortunate to have a coffee shop about a mile away from here. And so, weather permitting, I will get up and walk over there. And if I didn't like wake up too late, then I'll hang out there for a little bit and maybe work on something, or just like try writing a little bit because I'm trying to do that a little more. And
Mm.
then walk back and probably try to maintain the house and clean things up a little bit, and then dive into work around 10 or 11, and um, then it's like the client stuff, and then after that it's probably working on the the hobby projects until midnight or 1 a.m. So
Oh, so do you
yeah.
deliberately split the time? Like, do you always make sure you work on the hobby projects alongside the, the professional stuff?
In this chapter of my life, I'm trying to, yes,
Okay.
because the the hobby projects always end up feeding back into the work, because the workflows and like problems I solve there end up accelerating me or informing a specific process, or like a way that we bring on a contractor
Hmm.
on a project, that kind of thing. And so I try to. The last 2 years were pretty rough, and I took a break entirely. Like I didn't do anything that wasn't specifically required for work.
Okay.
And so it's sort of like a habit I'm getting back into. But when we
Mm.
first met, like that was a habit I was in. It's something I'm returning to, and it feels good.
Same. Like a couple of years, maybe even more, it was a case of the same. It dawned upon me that I was doing that. I always thought like, oh, I got this happening. I'll get around to it. And it was always on the shelf, at the front of the shelf. So I thought like it's kind of getting done, but I just kept it on the shelf still. And I was just doing like whatever paid the bills because obviously that's a priority.
Yeah,
And deep down, I realized, okay, I'm trying to like recuperate or whatever else. But then I realized that shit, that shelf's quite full now. It's actually breaking
yeah,
off the wall. Time to kind of get
yeah,
back into it.
yeah.
Was it easy to get back into it for you? Or did you feel like you had to like kind of like the engine's a bit like, seized up or, all that kind of stuff? Like, was it easy just to jump back into that mindset again of like, okay, work, then the hobby, personal stuff?
Once I was ready to, it was very easy.
Mm.
I tried forcing myself a lot over the past 2 to 4 years, and that didn't work out. And so I once I like let go entirely, like there was a point in like 2022 to 2022 where I was like, I might never make work that's not like specifically related to a client again. And like if
Hmm.
this job ends, like I might just take a programming boot camp and like figure that out. Like I
Mm.
was like I completely moved on from making things because
Hmm.
of a deep depressive episode and like sorting through like all the context of like the first 20 years of my life that set up the next 10 years of my life. So
Mm. Wow.
it was easy
If you don't mind,
once I
no,
was
no,
ready,
no, no,
like rather than forcing
no.
myself.
I guess like it's if you don't mind, like
Yeah, I
what
don't.
caused that last few years for you to not do personal work, and what caused that depressive episode, or rather, what was happening to you at that time when you were going through that episode?
I would love to hear your answer for this as well. Because I don't know how, like, it's not a single thing for me. It's a confluence of multiple factors. Um, Part of it was heartbreak. I had ended the most significant relationship of my life a month or two before um, we went into lockdown for the pandemic, and then like the whole
Right.
pandemic thing was a complete brain melter for a variety of reasons. And then there's sort of like the added complexity of like the political chaos that America is in the last 10 years and the economic chaos that sort of like is a result of that. And on top of that, like I had met Blake, my uh, creative partner, in 2019, and we had put together a pitch uh, for Disney at that point, and like he had contacts there, but like Disney was at a weird spot. Specifically, like their parks division was at a weird spot then, um, and sending that out and like not really like hearing anything back and just being like, well, am I crazy? And like I had like all these hopes for like, okay, well, we get to make like this really beautiful, amazing thing for or like with Disney and like this experience for attendees at the park. And then like just to sort of like hear nothing, which is like obviously like part of the experience of like pitching and like
Hmm.
sending those kinds of things out. But it like really hurt because I had placed so much of like my self worth, not just like on that like hobby pitch project, but like on like my performance as an art director. And like I had identified like so much of my value was on like what I was doing within like my employment and not like just being valuable because I exist. And like
Hmm.
what I can like be as a part of like my community of friends and neighborhood and that and family and that kind of thing. So it it's sort of like it's multifaceted. But deep heartbreak, deep disappointment, and having to come to terms with like the the circumstances, religion, and political and economic environments that like created the circumstances that I grew up in and the things that shaped my mind and the way I interact with the world. It's very
Hmm.
abstract, and I'm very sorry, but like
No,
it's
no, no, no.
it's just sort of like all of it kind of came to a head as a result of like uh 2020 and 2021, and everything that had gone on in there, and I was just like, okay, I don't really want to do this, so I'm not going to force myself to do this, and like there were
Yeah,
like some really dark like stretches there where I was just like,
yeah, yeah.
I don't have a purpose, and because I invested so much of like my identity into like what I could produce and what I could provide, and like
Hmm. Hmm.
all and it stripped me of like my value intrinsically. And I had
Hmm.
to find that to give to give it to myself, because nobody can really give you your intrinsic value. It's intrinsic. It's yours. You
Correct.
have to find
Yes.
out and give it to yourself. And so, yeah, it was kind of tough. But I haven't really like wrapped my brain around like how much of like the sort of societal level, like COVID and like the political
Yeah.
like awareness and economic awareness that was a result of all that like factors into it. So, but what about you?
Firstly, no, no. Firstly, I commend you for sharing it, and thank you for sharing it as well, because like it's not great that happened to you, but it's great to hear as well, because it's important to hear a like the same way when we listen to our fellow professionals, how they get into the industry or become the badasses that they are, and how it inspires us and whatever. Equally, people's low moments or things where they struggle with. For me in particular, that's how I learn. I learn from hearing about other people's experiences and observing others, and obviously trying to listen to my own as well. So I thank you for sharing that. But I guess before I share my stuff, like, what, how did you overcome that, or find that moment where you realize that, okay, things either need to change or something's going on and something needs to either be corrected or removed or whatever else? I guess one thing about being in a depressed state is you don't realize you're in it. It's weird. Like, you start off, you think you're walking in a puddle, you just feel wet on your feet, and then all of a sudden you're like, up to your neck in the ocean, and the current's taking you away. But then, fortunately, if you can swim, you can kind of swim out. Like, that's how I kind of see things. Like, depression is something that you're never plunged
Or if you
into
have
it.
somebody that has been through those deep waters and like can
Yes,
throw you a life raft and like help remind you where the shore is, you can start like
exactly.
slowly paddling. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how
Did,
did
did you
you
have
kind
like a
of
community
like?
sort of like around you? I want to hear that eventually from you, but like,
Oh no, no, for sure. Yeah.
I'll answer your question. Go ahead.
Good. Yeah. So, are you back at the shore? Are you back in that puddle, or are you headed towards that direction? And if so,
Yeah,
how did you get there?
I'm. I feel very confident in saying that I'm on the shore. I like this metaphor that we're using. I think it's more elegant than my typical like flare-ups analogy,
Uh-huh.
where if you have like an allergy, like you can have a
Right.
flare-up, and that's the way I sort of think about like depression and mental health and like the sort of complexities there. Um, I don't know if there's necessarily something like a state of being healed, because mental health is about consciousness, right? It's not as like direct as like you have a bone that is broken and this is how we heal it. I think it might be healthier if, like, as a society, we develop, or as a species, we develop more acute language to treat mental health damage in the way that we treat physical damage. There's somebody that has been really helpful to me in the last year or so, who talks about uh, the general state of mental health and how it's people will go to their therapist or psychiatrist complaining about a broken arm, and that professional will say, well, that's crazy, let's fix the arm. And then they come back in a week or a month, 2 months, with the same exact fracture from the same exact circumstances. And if it was an arm, people would say, how is your arm getting fractured? Like, how's this happening? Instead, like with mental health, we just say, oh well, that's the way it is. Crazy. Let's put you back together, instead of like sort of like
Mm-hmm.
addressing the thing that's breaking the arms. Um, so I'm on a tangent. I forget where I was going with that. I'm sorry, but to
It's
get back to
okay.
your question about being on like sort of out in the waves, I'm very much on the shore right now. I like the waves analogy because every once in a while you get a big one that
Mm-hmm.
even if you're high up on the shore, like it'll come and get you,
Yes.
especially if it's high tide. And like there's sort of like a seasonality to it with for me at least, which is why I don't. For me, probably there isn't like such a thing as healed, but there is. You get used to it, and you
Mm.
the bigger and bigger waves you handle, the more normal it becomes and the smaller they seem.
Mm.
Um, and part of what helped me get there was accepting, because like I really struggled like the first couple months of like really the dark chapters. I really had a hard time with accepting that like this is how I'm feeling and this is like where I'm at. Because I just didn't want to believe it. I didn't grow up in a community that acknowledged mental health or the needs thereof. And so um, I had to get to a point where I could like accept that this was what I was experiencing. And once I was able to accept it, I was able to just sit with it. And once you can sit with it, then you can like actually listen to like what it's trying to tell you about yourself. And it also really helps that like I had Blake, who went through his own very, 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 very dark chapters, sort of like
Mm.
prior to mine, and was able to like guide me and remind me that like yes, this is very rough, but where you're at right now is like where you're at right now. And the funny thing is,
Mm.
time keeps marching, so
Mm-hmm.
hang in there. So,
That totally true. And I think it's very like the way you described it, like because it's so, I guess, in our iteration as a species right now, and I think right now at least it's getting spoken about more. So it's not so much like it's on people's radar at least. Whereas I was born in the 80s and growing up in the 90s and even 2000s, like it was only mental health was only mentioned for people who struggled with it like incredibly, or at least in a medical term where they have to like start medicating you kind of thing. It was never
yeah, made it
like,
somebody else's problem. If it was just your problem, then like deal with it yourself. You
yeah.
know?
And especially like growing up around, most of my friends were dudes anyway. It was a case of like start being insert slur or whatever else, and that's it.
Yep.
That's how you did that. And people older than me, that's how they dealt with that. And then people older than them, it was like almost ended in like, do you just berate people into just sorting themselves out?
Yeah.
Which might work, might not. Maybe that's some kind of like, if you do it in a targeted way or in a very like clever way, maybe that can work for people. But leaving it to unqualified people to handle people in that way, it's not good. But yeah, just like just to like kind of answer like my relationship with depression and my understanding of it did begin from a young age. That's from and I am not also super open about all these things. So I'll probably will talk in like vague terms and not truly mention the specific things there. But growing up at a young age, that's one of the first things I remember, purely because a family member of ours suffered from that quite aggressively. And that person in that era, I remember them specifically being told by their peers around them what I just said. It was a case of like, there's nothing wrong with
So
you.
sorry.
You don't need to worry about it and that kind of stuff. So me observing that as a kid, that educated me straight away because I saw firsthand how it was impacting somebody and the struggles that they had. So I almost kind of learned by being there kind of thing. A bit like how you said, like with your like working for that band, like that's how you learn the skills that you got just by wanting to be there kind of thing. That was like it for me. So I kind of understood it by watching it, so to speak. Although not versed in like the medical terms or whatever, seeing that person overcome it almost with no help, as in like the help that you get today, that kind of taught me the language of how it works, almost the intricacies, how it can affect people and all that kind of stuff. And seeing that person at a point where they were like unable to do something to doing it, to almost seeing them now like it was never an issue in the first place. Seeing someone overcome that, it's like, okay, I kind of see how this thing works. However, that person was like on an extreme level. So I always use that as like the benchmark. In my own circumstances, I never, because I was never there, I could never really see it in myself. I was like, oh, I'm just like, maybe a bit nervous or whatever. And like you mentioned before, having conversations with myself, having like almost looking in the mirror and realizing things, I even didn't realize that I suffered from like anxiety, particularly social anxiety. I always have worked in jobs where you're around people, and I have always been fine in those situations and almost excelled in those situations. So I never realized that, oh, it's fine. It's almost like, let's say someone's an athlete, and when it comes to game time, they deliver, they absolutely nail it. Yet they don't realize that they hate that situation, but because they know how to handle it, they were fine. That was me. So it's kind of like when I
Masking,
realized
baby.
that, yeah, 1 million%. And COVID definitely showed me that, because when things shut down, and weirdly, I felt more peace by not being around people. That was like, oh, okay, what's going on here? And then all that kind of stuff. And then tracing back a few years before that, realizing that, like I said, like I'm, it's up to my neck. I kind of like breathing through my nose now because my mouth's submerged. What's happened here? And then tracing it back. And for me, it was more like, obviously life events for the last like 10, 15, 20 years, maybe even everything combined, slowly kind of like sets you on that path. And if you don't know how to handle it, you're always going to end up there regardless. Like it's like a car that hasn't had its steering aligned properly. If you don't take it, if you take your hands off the wheel, it's going to start drifting to one way or another. So you kind of have to keep it there. So that was kind of what's going on. It's kind of like yourself, a lot of things just built up. And for me, it was just more a case of like thinking that I'm a superhero and I can just handle it all and try my best to handle it all. And I have a very extreme work ethic. I will power through things. I've always done it. And I hate that I do it because it's a very stupid way of doing things. Like it's not productive at all. It actually does more damage than it does things. And it's a bit, it's not elegant. But anyway, that's my default. Okay, things, are getting intense. Let's power through it. Then obviously my body, the older I get, I'm heading towards 40 soon. So my body's definitely not be able to handle the pressure that I put under it. Then, you lose, I guess your shields are down at like 10% now. And then when they get to zero, then it starts hitting you, then you like crash, burn out, all that kind of stuff. So for me, it was a case of like, yeah, this isn't working. Let's find a different way. And then realizing, oh, it's this. Oh, that's how depression manifests in myself. And I guess one of the lessons I learned, that just because I can see it and experience it through someone else doesn't mean you can see it in yourself. And it does manifest for different people in different ways. And also depression is a consequence. It's like a footprint. Like everyone knows what a footprint is, but not anything can make a footprint, and they all don't operate in the same way. They don't come from the same place. They're different species, whatever, if that makes sense. So depression is almost like it's like the fossil. It's like the fossil record. It's like that's the end result, or that's what's happening right now. But what's going on behind that? What's causing that? And for some people, it's different. For some people, it's not. So yeah, it was just a big, long conversation, realization for myself. And I guess one of the other things as well, where it was like, again, when we first connected, that was the era where I was like pumping out crazy work. A lot of it was just overcompensating for the lack of work before that for different reasons. Then I realized that I'm not making personal stuff anymore. One of it was because, yes, I'm working on this better thing. I'm done with the old way of doing things. I want to make better stuff. But then I kind of use that as a shield. And then I was like, hold on, why am I not making stuff? Why is my portfolio still X years old? And yeah, then it was like kind of like, okay, let's take stock. Let's figure out what it is. And in a weird way, it wasn't a deliberate thing. It was like my brain. I always see the mind detached from the body. It's like it exists with it, but it's kind of not from it kind of thing. And whether it was like my biological self or my mental self, it was like kind of like manipulating me to kind of like seek where this issue is. It's like if you got like some muscular pain, you kind of tend to just put pressure on it to kind of like relieve it, even though it might not be that. It might be somewhere down your hips, or it's like referred pain or whatever. Yeah, that's what happened. And it was a case like, okay, let's sort shit out. I have people that rely on me. And if I don't sort stuff out, this could end very, very badly. Not like in a dramatic sense, it could be, but also like I can't operate the way I want to operate. And I overthink things. I definitely think way things way too much, and a bit like, have you seen Dune Part Two
Oh yeah.
yet? So when he makes that line of like, I have these visions, but I can see potential paths. That's how I worry, right? And I understand that's worrying, as opposed to me being super prepared and careful and thinking things. So
Mhm.
yeah, I understand how to label things, how my brain was working, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, now I'm like at the shore, or another analogy, I
Good.
realize that I'm an amphibian. Sometimes I have to be in the water. I just have to operate that way. But I need to be on land,
Yeah.
and I can't really be too far away from both. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where my journey was.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Um, I like the amphibian bit too. Uh, I think that's more effective than what I was trying to get at with like the bigger and bigger waves you survive, the
Mhm.
smaller they seem because you're
Yeah.
experiencing them. I like the amphibian uh, metaphor. That's good. Did you and if you don't want to answer this, please don't. But did you end up going to like a professional to sort of like develop some of the vocabulary to like recognize these things within yourself, figure out like what a baseline is for like semi-normal, if that
hmm
exists?
Not quite. So I don't know. I don't know why. Again, I think it's like around since COVID, it's very difficult to get appointments like in the UK, unless you pay
Mhm.
private, and that can get super expensive as well. And I think, I don't know, growing up, you're so used to like a national health service, you just tend to be like, okay, I will just wait for that. Also, I'm the type of person who, unless I'm like literally bedridden or things like start falling off, I won't go to see a doctor. But like I mentioned before, I thought I can power through it. Maybe it's just the era that I was born up in. Like, I remember in jobs as well, like you were told like you better come into work unless you literally can't, and I take that literally, almost like
Yep.
that's me being like a great employee kind of thing. So yeah, so not quite. A
Okay.
lot of it was like just researching, and a lot of it is having
Sure.
conversations. My wife's like, she's a great person to tell me what I am and who I am, especially in ways where like I don't see it, and people around me as well. Like we know ourselves better than anyone else, yet there's some parts that are blind spots that we have no idea that we do these kind of things. And like for example, this is more of a comical one, but since being like COVID, I've definitely worked from home. I burp openly, and I didn't realize like I've lost my manners in certain ways. And
Yeah.
now when people come over, I just like burp. I don't even realize I do it. So it's like, okay, cool. That barrier's gone. And yeah, she's definitely will call me out on these certain things, and she'll also
Yeah.
like, and also people around me will like highlight and say like something's changing you, or there's this, there's that. There's a moment of being
Uh-huh.
in denial, thinking no. There's this reason is the reason why. And for me, it was more like, again, probably social anxiety thing. Like I tend to avoid those kind of things, so I try and figure it out myself. But a lot of it was like, okay, um, let's break it down like you would a design problem. Let's figure it out. Let's see what you can unpack before you kind of repack, so to speak.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's how it was for me. What about yourself?
So the people closest to me at that point really encouraged me to get into like a therapy counseling sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I did that, and it was really important for me to do that at that point, to develop the vocabulary and sort of like the understanding of self and like relationship with myself. Um, but I ended up sort of like cycling through. I got to a certain point with like one professional and then ended up like sort of going through a couple others because I didn't realize that like I had gotten what I needed to out of that experience, and now it was time for me like with that knowledge and that understanding to just do the work and just like
Mm-hmm.
sit with it and apply all the stuff I learned, because ultimately it is my consciousness and like I'm the one that has to heal it, uh and it's not something that anybody else can do for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I needed to do that initially. And I think that if it's something that someone can afford, it's probably helpful, especially if like you're as in the dark as I was to all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that um, platforms like TikTok have done a very good job of sort of democratizing the experience of like healing your trauma, and I I got a lot of very helpful like secondhand experience from other people sort of saying like this is where I've been at and this is like a
Yeah.
breakthrough I had today, and like it was just like hyper speed like therapy for me basically, where I was just like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in the same way you were talking about like that family member where you were like, oh, I'm learning sort of like vicariously through like this person's experience. Um i i had that in like 2022 and 2023 to sort of like guide me through some of those darker moments, because these people were just like, yeah, like, well, I mean, I don't think that would be possible on a platform outside of TikTok, just because of the way the algorithm works for TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
and its prediction recommendations are just unreal, um, and they also handle filtering slightly differently than the other platforms. But yeah, there was a point where like I needed sort of like the professional like structural education, and then it became more of like a secondhand slash experiential sort of like, okay, let's apply this.
Mm. And I think that's the best way, and I think is the only way to really tackle it. Obviously, for anyone listening, we're not medical professionals.
No.
We're definitely not medically trained in any particular way.
Mhm.
It's just our experiences.
Yep.
So please do like seek out any help or anything that you might feel like you need. Even just have a conversation with
Yes.
yourself and take it from there, rather than let things manifest. But what I realize is like, especially like with mind stuff, mental health, for example. Um, it is very much like building up a skill set. You say you work out every day. I have moments where I can get intense into it. Then I fall out. But when I'm on it, I'm on it. And
Mhm.
there's something about when you stop and then try and get back on again. Like I'm definitely coming to terms again. Another re-education of like what I'm putting into my body and how it really affects me, not just only physically, like you know how appearance wise or whatever, but almost like we said with music, realizing that, well, the classic line is "you are what you eat," but almost in an extra level of like how it affects me, and then what it can do, and like, okay, if I eat this, I'm going to be like this for the next few days, and whatever else as well, and doing that in a mental capacity, like seeing it as like a muscle or like a system to train. And what you mentioned before, like I guess depression, that's just when, because I've heard people say, and I also have experienced it too, where a little bit of stress is good. It's a mechanism intended to keep us either surviving or to progress or to get through stuff. We're all anyone who's listening who's worked on a project will know the stuff. The one that you really connect with wasn't easy. It wasn't one that was like that went great. It was one that you really had to push through, find new ground, and that's what stress is. When you work out, you put your muscles under stress. You basically tear them apart so they can heal again a little bit stronger. That's how your bones get stronger. That's basically the law of the universe and physics and whatever. Again, I'm not a physicist or biologist, so don't take me for that. But that's what I think the way like it kind of works. And if you do that in a mental health capacity, it works. But when things are imbalanced or you don't take care of things, then that's when you fall into it. The stress mechanism, wherever it might be, goes in overdrive, and then like figuratively speaking, starts eating you up. And then like, or yeah, the stop button needs to be pressed, and it's like a million miles away. But how have you found working on that? Like, is it part of your day to day now, or do you struggle with keeping that balance and working on your mental health?
I was I'm at a point now where I'm able to sort of maintain the halo of things that support the central concept of mental health for me. If I maintain those, like healthy sleep, healthy diet, uh, not really drinking all that much at all anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Reaching out to friends and family, and like not being an island and trying to just sort of like be the tough guy and go through it all alone.
Mm.
If I maintain that halo, like everything within is going to be pretty healthy. Um, one of the big things for me, the turning point actually, and sort of my healing. I always forget this because it was such like a blur of an experience, and like the moments around it were really turbulent. Um, the turning point for me in my healing and like understanding myself was going to a clinic for treating PTSD. Now
Mm-hmm.
I had like a little bit of PTSD from a couple events early in life, but because those events were like within the home, there's another layer of PTSD. So if PTSD is like a, a direct clean fracture on a bone, PTSD is sort of like a spider web of like tiny little compound hairline fractures.
Mm,
And it's a lot harder to recognize just because there's so much of it out there.
mm,
And a lot of us, I think, whether we're conscious of it or not, are sort of operating from a place of complex post-traumatic post-traumatic stress disorder,
mm-hmm.
where there we sort of like understand that like we see something terrible happening and we worry about that a little bit in the back of our minds, and it shapes the way we navigate the world and navigate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to a clinic for that, and that was really, really helpful because it gave me a very direct structure in terms of like identifying, okay, this is a thought I'm having. Is it real or is it imagined? And uh, can I counteract that with like some observable reality that is like contrary to the narrative I'm giving myself about myself and like my relationship to myself and the world around me. Um, so for me, that was really helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
if anybody out there in the audience is uh, thinks that they might suffer from something like that, it was really good for me. So
Mm. No, that's well put. And yeah, I'm definitely passing judgment on people, but I know people who need to have that conversation, and I can see it how it's manifesting in them. Um, and all they need to do is just either get some help or see somebody. But do you think, like, from your experiences, you can almost convince someone to go there, or does it? And I think you can answer this already, but does it have to come from within that particular person to even seek the help or like make the steps towards either understanding or recovery?
I think people can get convinced to go. I think in terms of the the openness to like allow a a perspective or a treatment or practice to properly give you the framework to heal, like that has to be internal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that like we I would be shocked if there was a significant portion of the population that has been involuntarily institutionalized that was made better as a
Yeah,
result of that involuntarily institutionalization. That's an extreme example,
yeah,
but like
for sure.
it's a pattern, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that you have to be honest with yourself enough to say like I need help to go and seek help
Yeah,
that's effective. So I we're not pressuring anybody to do anything. Just
nah, for sure.
if you feel
And
like you need something, then
I'm
like
also,
there's resources to
and
look
I'm
at
also,
for. And I didn't
yeah,
know that like a PTSD clinic
yeah,
was even a thing. So
yeah.
or that like I was a candidate for it. And as they were doing the intake, they were like, "Buddy, how have you made it
Yeah.
this far?" So
And I'm also
um,
saying it like as someone who is convinced that they can't be convinced. Like I'm
yeah,
someone I'll put myself in the bracket of like I have to kind of like make that realization and make that pivot myself. Because
yeah,
looking back, like I've been advised so many times on so many different things, not just mental health stuff, and I've been like, nah. Then I realized, oh, should have done that. Should have listened to that. This is from like
yeah.
forever. So I guess one of those things is like listening to yourself. But with that said, and all the things we just discussed, how has that affected you as a creative now? With the tools that you have for your mental health, have you seen it bleed into the way you
Yes.
approach either work or just your creative process? And how has it
So
affected you?
so much of that process of like healing myself and all that comes with that was learning to trust myself again and trust my voice,
Mm,
trust my tastes, my eye, and that helped me to just relax. And I'm sure you'll agree with me. Like you create your best work when you're relaxed. When you're because if you force yourself into flow, it's erratic and not flowy.
yeah.
But if you just sort of slip into it because you're relaxed, then it's magic, and the time melts away, and the difficulties melt away, and it's fun. So
Mm,
um, the I think the biggest concrete change was um, helping to counterbalance the self doubt and the overthinking, um, and letting myself just get close and accept that like if it's close enough, then it's close enough, and if it's not close enough, then like I'm that much closer, and I only have to like noodle on it a little bit more. You know,
yeah.
I I I think about the creative process in the way I think about uh, truth and reality. Um, and the funny thing about both of those is that we're each having this experience on different sides of the globe, practically, but it's still sort of hallucinated. Like, I'm pretty sure the computer's there. It might be a little bit over there. Like, actually, like your perception. I'm pretty sure I'm wearing a blue shirt, but like, am I actually? And so, like, it because everything is sort of hallucinated. It doesn't have to be like. And this is my brain just saying like it's black or it's white, and just learning to live in the gray. Part of the process was like accepting that like there's a lot that isn't going to be either healed or unhealed. It's just going to be what it is, and you learn to live with it. Um, and the creative process is like sort of getting close enough that like it it shares that emotion that you're trying to communicate, or like shares that part of the narrative that you're trying to like communicate like up the chain, or like you know
Mm, mm,
it doesn't have to be as like dogmatically structured as I thought it needed to be as a
mm,
younger person. So
mm.
just
And
relax and trust yourself. That's what I'm trying to tell myself.
yeah, and did you ever think of that beforehand? Like, obviously, you would have heard that. You would have like, it's just like, it's a very simple formula, but it's super
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Similar to myself as well. Like, it was a case of either that or the other option is it's not going to end well, so to speak. But
Yeah,
once I did that, it was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I should do this more often. Um,
yeah.
did you ever get close to realizing that beforehand, or did it have to take all of this to get to that realization?
It's funny. I think there were like glimpses I had of what that either felt like or could be like. But it's Blake always says this thing, especially like in the dark times when he was like, "It's gonna be better. Like you're gonna be okay
Mm-hmm.
at some point."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't know what that even means. Like, what does that even like look like or feel
Yeah.
like? I don't know who I am anymore. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what who am I gonna be? And he's like, just it's like I'm telling you that you're gonna see a unicorn tomorrow. You've never seen a unicorn. You've only seen pictures of a unicorn, and it it's the same thing. It was the same thing for me in terms of like just like learning how to relax and trust myself. Where I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's easy. Like I just like I say that to myself, and then it's the reality. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, or it wasn't for me. And once the little bits of like really deep flow that like I had that crack, obviously, like I was obsessed with it, and like it's a high that I was chasing for years.
Yeah.
Um, but like once I sort of set the environment to like bring all this back to like the beginning of the conversation, like the internal like my internal environment to allow myself to just like relax and play and have fun, which is the whole point of like this creative process. Like, yes, we're working hard and we're delivering things on time, and like we're solving problems for the project and the client. It still has to be fun because that fun translates. Like if you're having a miserable time, like it's like forcing yourself into flow. It's going to be jagged and sharp instead of flowy and smooth.
Yeah, same. Like I've always known that, but I've always kind of like tried to keep it at bay because I thought that's not how you're going to survive as a, like a professional, especially elite one. And I definitely don't put myself in that category yet. I'm definitely working towards that space, but I always wanted to be in that zone where like I know I'm at my best when I'm having fun and I'm enjoying it. Now I'm not mean fun as enjoying it like it's like it's just being careless, but I need to have that kind of like connection with the project where it's like we're gonna run a million miles an hour with this and go as far as we possibly can, and really like extract all whatever can be done from it. And also, you kind of know when it's fun as well because anything you put into it just leads to like I guess a positive outcome. Like you just know when something feels good, like when you're making it some music or whatever, you know when something sounds right or you're onto something versus I'm just doing I'm going through the motions and what have you. And yeah, I realized that, okay, I can't keep that at bay anymore. I have to lean into that even more. And whether that means it's going to maybe like, not give me the opportunities that I probably wanted or less opportunities because not everything's going to have that. So be it. Like I have to make that choice. Like, do I want it or not? And for me, it's like, I have to go that way. Well, at least I'm going to try and I'm prepared to go back to the old ways if possible. But
well, it
with that
comes down
said,
to like, what's your motivation? Like, what are you making any, like, what are we doing any of this for? And like, sure, there's sort of like the financial aspect of it where it's like, yeah, I gotta like pay bills, and this is how like I've trained myself to like pay the bills. But also like, if that's the only motivation for this, look inward, like because that's like not a really healthy way to like live your life because you're spending like so much of each day like unhappy and
yes
things should be joyful. You said something earlier that I had a question about like just the sort of like hard ass like I hear these stories about like the Fengzhou design school or like um the the other one in Pasadena Art Center about how like grueling and like how boot campy it is, and I can I wonder sometimes if like there's a point in my life where that would have been helpful for me, but I also like being on the shore now know that like that would have like exacerbated all the problems and like for that I was having at that point, and like I would have had like had I made it through that process because it's grueling, and I don't know if I had the mental fortitude to make it through it in this hypothetical situation. Mm-hmm. I wonder about the health. Like I want to know your thoughts on sort of like the baked in like hierarchy of like classifying like elite artists versus like non-elite artists, whatever that might mean, you know? I mean, for some reason I thought of like Dylan Cole, who's just like an incredible designer and like with a just insane track record. I haven't spoken to him, but I wonder if he would like be comfortable with us like calling him elite, right? Like it's just you're always like it's all relative, right? And like does your place matter to you moment to moment, or is that just sort of like legacy for like other people that are outside perspectives to figure out, and it shouldn't like should that matter? Because like we all want to be elite, like we all want to like do like incredible work and share incredible work and have other people be like, oh yeah, that was great, dude. But like that gets back to the question of like motivation, like what are we doing this for, you know?
So for
where,
me,
where do you fall with all that? That was sort of a word salad. I'm sorry.
I've thought of that many times, And for me, it's like, yes, obviously there's the human side. Now it's weird I say human side because we're human, but like a human, I mean primal stuff, like wanting to be all conquering, wanting to be victorious or whatever. There's definitely that ego element of there where like, okay, if I can have something where it's like it stacks up against what's considered like, well, I always refer to, like, I guess we say elite, like these are creative billionaires. So these are the ones that have like, because billionaire is a measurable thing, right? Like it's considered successful. However, some of the ones that I see don't seem to be like elite in terms of them as people. They just amassed this a thing that we can measure. We can see that as like, the world for the last God knows how many millennia has been built on riches and power and all that kind of stuff. So that's why if you can amass that, it means you've achieved something. It's like, I guess it's like the equivalent of like a top score in a game. Like there's a top score, you can finish the game. That's one thing. If you got the top score, and then if you got the highest score that no one else can reach, there's that other thing that's in that aspect. So yeah, there's an element of that. But for me, that's like very low down the pecking order. Like that has never appealed to me, although it would be nice. Like it would be great. But for me, how that manifests is I need to know that I have done something or done a project where I know that that's me at that absolute best. I have done that already, but that's at that particular iteration of me, which is still like, you could say like infant stage or adolescent stage as a creative. I'm talking about like peak performance, fully developed, and then I have made like that one particular project where I know that's the best that I could ever possibly do something, and it's out there, and that's it. Like I have this compelling need to just create something, wherever it might be, and what I refer to as elite, like say for example, I don't know, let's say the Millennium Falcon, for example, is a manifestation of something that's elite. Or the Xenomorph or whatever. There's the obvious pop culture things that everyone sees as iconic. If I could do something like that, then I can be like, okay, that's me being elite. Whether that is seen by other people, that doesn't motivate me. And fortunately or unfortunately, I don't care. However, because that's not going to stop. Like everyone right now could say, you're the best, you're awesome, you're crazy good. But for me inside, it's hollow because I haven't achieved that thing yet. And that's what I'm hunting for.
Glad to hear that.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Healthy. Yeah, it does. It does. And this is something I've wanted to like mention a couple times. But I really admire these the ship series you've been doing for a couple years now. Like the consistency, the way that you've grown and your skill set has evolved, and your design language and the way like shapes and elements are flowing into each other. Like I admire it. Proud of you. You're doing good work.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you. Now for me, that's something that I have to. I find it tough to hear that. I don't know what it is. I've realized that like when any praise, and that's not like me being like humble brag, whatever it is. Like it's just that section of my brain is just switched off. So I have to like kind of like accept that and process it better. But I do appreciate that. Thank you so much. But I always get put back to what I just
throw
said.
It back at you, like in the future. I'm just gonna be like, dude, this is sick.
Like I hear you. And by the way, like I'm also very, very much aware that I'm nowhere near what's already out there, because that's important as well. But I also know of people, not just artists, but like people in the non-art life in general, who are the reverse. They think they have achieved it and they think they're excellent. Yes, it can be like, but like to give them benefit of the doubt, they're also selling themselves short because they could achieve so much more. And not like in a, like, like a extreme way, like definitely in a healthier way, but like always strive for better. Again, better in a healthy way, not in an unhealthy way. So I see it in the opposite side too, but for me, it's like, I'm definitely nowhere near like what the current level is. But I also, and this is one part of thing I've mentioned before, like about having a conversation with myself, like, okay, so what does make me tick? How do I work? That's one thing I realized is, okay, no matter what anybody says of what I'm doing, or if it's good or bad or not, I'm always fixated on where I think I can be. And that is a good thing because it pulls you along, but it's a negative thing because it can really, like, I'm very harsh on myself. Like in terms of like, if I spoke to myself as an individual right next to me, I would not be a nice person to myself. Yeah, I would not do that to anybody else, just myself. So that's one thing I learned as well. Um, but yeah, to you, that same question to you, and a follow up question to that, because I know we're going to wrap up now, and it's a shame because I know we had so many other things we want to talk about. But yeah, answer the same question you just asked me for yourself, and also where you're at now with your growth and your journey. What is creativity for you next, or what's coming next for you?
I love your answer, first of all. For me, first I want to jump back to like what I said about how I think I would have had a very tough time with sort of like the boot campier approach at a place like FCD or
Mm-hmm.
Art Center, where in my experience in environments like that, a lot of the motivation tends to be shame, and for me, that's like fear as a motivator. Well, they're related. And shame burns pretty fast as a fuel, but it's pretty dirty, and it isn't clean, to use a weird metaphor. And so I'm trying to recalibrate still, because it's a process, right? I'm still like getting back into the habit of like doing that the hobby and like personal work stuff to evolve like the professional work. Um, I'm figuring out how to keep that in balance without using shame as a motivator, because I spent so many decades of my life using some level of shame as a motivator to keep myself moving or more productive or competitive. And I think that there's a way to be, for the purposes of this conversation, we're using the term elite. Um, I I think there's a way to be at an elite level, or produce something that like within the context of this conversation we would call elite, in a healthy way. And I think that's to connect back to the concept of like relaxing and trusting yourself. I think that's where the key is for me. And so I'm trying to focus on that, and like I know how to do the things, so I'm doing the things. It's yes, when you see the final thing is complex, but it's a whole lot of like compounded simplicity, sort of building up to that complex thing. And all of that, those simple things, I know how to do, so I don't have to stress out about them. But I do need to pay attention to how I feel inside and how like I'm feeling about that process, because that process is going to be evident in the final work. When it comes to everything for me, I haven't thought about this too much, so I feel like I'm doing a poor job
Sure.
of communicating like
No,
how
no, no,
I'm
no.
thinking
It's
about
all
it.
good.
That said, um, I I just want to be happy and content and working hard and pushing myself like a little bit harder and better every day, but in that healthy, non-shame motivated way. In that sort
Mm-hmm.
of like, okay, well, I did 3 sets of like military presses with 30s yesterday. Like, let's do 4 sets, you know? Um, so like it's just sort of like an internal self competition versus like a seeing my name up in the rafters with the other elite artists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah,
Cool.
I think
And
that kind of answers it.
no, no, it does, and it's good because like you thought about it, you had that conversation. But I know, like when, like, I guess much younger, would you have had a different answer? Like, would you want to have been like, was that the motivation?
Yeah,
Like, I want to be up there. Yeah.
yeah.
See.
So much ego was involved. Like
Yeah.
so much. It was all for ego. Like it was all for just sort of like aggrandizing me. And
Mm-hmm.
uh it, that's very silly, past Daniel. Be better.
Yeah.
And you are better now. So like congratulations. Keep doing it.
And
I don't know.
what is? Yeah.
It's so fun to like make things and share things with people, and just like
No, I agree.
as I've been doing more of like the writing and like the storytelling thing, it's just been so fun to like share previews of that with like friends, and like see their eyes light up, or like them get like a little emotional at different points. It's cool. Like that's what's fun to me, more so than just being like, oh, I crushed out 1,500 renders this week, you know?
No, I think that sharing element, like it is like when you do any kind of craft, whether it's like cooking or making art or whatever, it's that sharing element and knowing that like how the other person experiences it, because the viewer never experiences the creative process; they experience the finished process. It's like it's weird little like, I guess, ecosystem or process or whatever. But yeah, like there's something in that, and I'm sure psychologists can explain, oh, that's the reason why that is, and there's like a little specific word for it. But yeah, that's the other element of art too. Like I have this thing where I put a lot of effort into making it. When I release it or whatever, like my love for it is done. However, I also like do appreciate when people like still can connect with it, and people enjoy it or whatever. That's super cool. I acknowledge that that's like a fun aspect. Same with me. Like when I see someone make something, like yes, things are great. A lot of things are high quality these days, but there's something that like surpasses that, and it really like gets students like, yes, that aspect of creativity I really enjoy too. And yeah, like that aspect of sharing is one thing that is I definitely appreciate and acknowledge more. I never thought of it before too much. I thought like, oh, that's cool, but I never actually know that that's actually a significant, deliberate step of the creative process. It's not just like by accident. Like, there's an important way to like maybe work on that in a better way, like how you deliver that to people, however that manifests, whether it's like you hold off on things, let them cook a little bit more, or whatever it might be. Or at least like, delivering it in the best medium possible, as opposed to, an online post or something or whatever. But yeah, what I guess the last point is for yourself, what's next? Like this Dan now, this iteration of Dan who's conquered all these things, discovered a lot about himself. What's next for you?
The way this question is framed makes me want to be like, well, I have X, Y, and Z to announce, but I don't.
Okay.
So the things I hope are next for me are continued sort of like inner peace, and that sort of like flowing into making more things, and then hopefully selling those things and sharing them with the world in a variety of different mediums.
Sick.
Hopefully I'll have some news on that soon, because there's a couple of pitches going out.
And what everyone can hit the links to find you, but just let people know where they can keep in touch with you, or maybe even reach out, or just discover you, and find out where these new drops will be coming.
The easiest place to find me right now is on Instagram. I'm recalibrating sort of how much I'm on the internet these days, and I let my website expire. I had like this kind of fun like case study situation set up there for a couple years, and Instagram is probably the easiest right now. I'm also on Discord quite a lot. It's just easier to chat there. But yeah, Instagram is probably the easiest. So not Dan Martin on Instagram, because there's a lot of Dan Martins.
Sick. Dan, we covered like 10% what we wanted to, but that obviously gives us enough scope for future episodes. Thanks so much again. And obviously, this was also a catch up for us as opposed to just an episode 2. So we're going to not make it last like almost a decade before we speak again. But yes. Thanks so much again, Dan, for coming on.
Thank you. It was great catching up with you. Bye.
A massive thanks to Dan for being very open about his journey. And I'm sure you'll take heart and inspiration from his story as I did. Hit the links to give Dan a follow and see what he is up to. Then head to learnsquared.com and enhance your creative journey like it did for ours, like it did for us. And remember, all the first lessons are free. I've been your host, Aaron Danda. Till next time.